Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host Jeremy. But more importantly, we are joined by Hugo Toovey, founder of 25 Stay Alive. Hugo, how are we going, mate?
Lads, thanks for having me. Good to we had a bit of a preamble chatting offline. Been following what you guys have done for a while and love the passion and yeah, really good to be on the potty, lads, and good to meet virtually.
Likewise, mate, we've also been following the journey, and I think something that's definitely stood out to us is your passion for not just mental health, not just for health in general, but for encouraging such a topic at such a young age, especially to guys, because we're in our mid 20s and we know that when it comes to health, when it comes to talking about health, we don't really do it all that often. And this is why 25 Stay Alive, why yourself, why Gotcha for Life stood out to us so much. So give us a little brief synopsis as to what that means for you and what you do in the space.
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. I think I was like that, and I think that's what I sometimes forget, that if it wasn't for what I've gone through, which I didn't obviously choose it, and I'm still very much going through it. It kind of forced my hand a bit. You're forced to go to these doctor's appointments. You're forced to undergo all the treatments I have because you need to do what you can to stay alive. But I guess for me, over all those years, I felt like there was just something missing in the space for young people in general, not just men, but just young people in general. I found there wasn't really that spotlight on healthcare and how we can access healthcare, and what are self checks and what it means for blokes to bloody check their nuts in the shower, and what it means for women to have regular breast exams, and more importantly at a younger age when you're a young adult. Because typically speaking, when you're in your 20s, you've often, finished a degree. You often find that career path in your 20s, and you're kind of on your own. You've well and truly moved out of home. You're paying bloody rent, and you moved in with your housemates, and you go to the pub and complaining about $12 bloody beer prices or whatever, and that's kind of the level of where you're at, right? And you're spot on. You're kicking the footy on the weekend, that sort of stuff, and healthcare, seeing your doctor, chatting to your mates and having these more in-depth conversations, and not D&Ms every time you catch up, but every now and then actually sort of saying like, how are you, lads? What's going on? Or talking about what you're going through, your mental health stuff, having these annual checkups and realizing this needs to start now. And that's what I felt was missing, and that's the gap that I'm trying to fill. And I've got a lot of grand plans and ideas on how to get there, but ultimately I just want to simplify it. I want to get out there to football clubs and communities and workplaces and speak to young adults to kind of say, hey, I'm not telling you stuff that you already know to sleep well, eat well. I'm sort of saying the simple stuff, do the checks, see your GP, know your risks, explore your family history, give your bloody mate a hug, check in on him, reach out if you need help. Just the simple shit we know, but simplifying it in a way that people can relate to it. So it's something that I've created through my personal experiences, and I've seen already firsthand the impact it can actually have, which there's nothing more powerful than that.
I think when I initially came into contact with you, I'd listened to your episode. I forgot her name, but it was a fantastic episode, a great potty. And I remember thinking I was having a bit of issues with my stomach at the time. And I remember listening to that episode and I was like, you know what, fuck it. I'll just make that appointment with my GP, get a blood test done, get a scan done. Cause I was just having a bit of discomfort with my stomach, albeit it's all okay, but it's that uncertainty. It's that feeling of fear. And I think it's that almost that masculine urge just to kind of push on with it, just kind of get on with it and not acknowledge that there might be something there. And granted, most of the time there isn't, but you'd rather be safe than sorry. Curious to know, how is your health currently?
Yeah, and sorry, and just on that too, mate. And I'll definitely answer the next one, because when you ask how my health is, it's a bloody 10 essay response sometimes. So I'll get to the first part first. But firstly, great, so glad to hear you actually were proactive and you saw a doctor. And what you said is a very good point that I just want to reinforce. And if one person is bloody listening to this on the way to work, and hopefully it's more than that, lads, but I might not be that interesting to a lot of people, but if one person's listening to it and they kind of go, that's a good point. I don't want them to panic, right, and rush off and go, oh shit, I've got bowel cancer. Because you're right, for most people, it's probably going to be fine. But what I say to people at an earlier age, like you've now got a benchmark, right? you have seen your doctor. If you've needed to have tests, you've had the test. For those who might need to, say, have a colonoscopy or, have a scan or whatever, they've now got a baseline. And that's what people sometimes miss, that fact of, like, in years to come, if something goes wrong, you can say, actually, let's look back at, a few years ago. Oh, yeah, your bloods work. Actually, they were a bit. So, okay, that is normal for you to have an elevated, whatever that might be. So I always say it's really important to have a baseline, to have a relationship with your GP. And if something does happen, and touch wood, it never does, but if you notice this weird bloody rash or this lump on your testicle, I guarantee it, you feel a lot more confident in going to see that doctor. To answer the question about how my health is, look, it is a bit of a roller coaster, and that's just the nature of my health. Some days are better than others. It can be unpredictable. I can have, today's been a pretty good day. And I guess a lot of people that see me might not know the behind the scenes of, for me to be at an event, or sometimes for me to even be at work, I've had to take a plethora of different medications to slow my bowel movements. I've, currently, I might be on a strong painkiller just to kind of do the simple things that people probably take for granted each day. But you do get very good at kind of, getting used to that. So, your pain threshold might be better, or, having to hold in a bowel movement and, naturally everywhere you go, knowing where toilets are and stuff like that, which just seems so common, not, knowledge for me, because I speak about it so openly. For a lot of people, bath my son tonight, or, like I said, actually go into the office today, or, work on my charity, or take the dogs for a walk. Well, for me, that's a good day. Even though I've had discomfort throughout the day, I'm still able to do that, compared to the days I'm in hospital, or I'm bedridden because I can't do that. So that's what I'm all about, taking those days when it comes. I don't get much control. Tomorrow might not be a good day, and that's just the unfortunate nature of it. Constantly trialing new medications, seeing new doctors, and ultimately kind of just delaying the inevitable, which will be to have some more major surgery to have a permanent stoma, and hopefully improve my quality of life. But yeah, as it stands, lads, I'm doing okay today, which is a good thing.
How do you feel talking about your health? Obviously, it's a big part of who you are in your keynote speaking, in your day-to-day life. How is it just talking about your health, and what do you, I guess, feel? What are the feelings that come up when talking about it to different people?
Yeah, it's a good point, Jeremy. I think you do get used to talking about it, because it's such a big part of your life, if that makes sense. So, like, I guess because I'm still living it, and it's what I do for, essentially what I do for work, and it's what I do in keynote speeches. It's a big part of my charity. It's kind of who I am in that respect, and I'm one that, I can openly talk about it, and I'm happily will talk about it, and I don't get sort of triggered by talking about it. I don't get sick of talking about it, because I think I've seen the ultimate effect from talking about it. And I think that's the real powerful stuff for me, is that by sharing my story, I've heard multiple people and had the ultimate feel-good stories of, saving a life. And so that, to me, once you experience that feeling, it's pretty powerful. And now I'm just knowing that guy, from whether it's my mates or, like we're doing now, and we chatted offline. There's a way I do it, though. I kind of do it with a bit of humor, and I'm very candid in how I talk about it, because I feel like it's the perfect icebreaker. And it's so weird that me talking about testicles or bowel movements, or all that sort of stuff, like, I don't even blink. Like, it doesn't change any part of my body. Whereas a lot of people, if they're sitting at the pub and they're talking about their bowel movements, they'd feel pretty uncomfortable, because it's not usually a normal thing you do whilst you're having a schnitty. But yeah, I just get used to it, to be honest, and I like talking about it, and I like educating people with it. I love when people ask me some real curveball questions that sometimes they think, oh, I'm not sure if I can ask this, and I apologize. I say, no, absolutely go for it, because I think that's how we all learn. But ultimately, I will say, I'm cancer free, right? Um, I'm living with the absolute sort of aftermath of what I've gone through. And so I am, I guess, mindful of those who are living with, say, a terminal cancer diagnosis, which can be a lot harder or more triggering, in the fact that they're living with something that they know that will likely, not guaranteed, will likely take them to the stage where they might not be able to go on any longer, which is quite a big thing to kind of, take in and comprehend. So I guess I'm in a position where, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to live a long life. It might be a different life to a lot of people, but I'm fortunate in that regard. So Yeah, mate. It's I'll happily talk about it. And as I do in presentations, the things that often get me emotional every single time is when I talk about family, the impact and what I've gone through and how it's how it's impacted my wife, which often they're things that people probably don't see. And now I'm a dad. You hear the old dads are big softies. I kind of get that now because every time I do a presentation, I talk about my son and the joy he brings me. I often get quite emotional.
Mate, first of all, we're really happy to hear that you're cancer free. Obviously, you're still navigating a lot of health challenges, as you said, from the aftermath of kind of all the treatments that you went through. I'm curious to know though, obviously, because you had the two cancer diagnoses. You had the bowel cancer, and then that was 5 years after the initial cancer diagnosis, which was the testicular cancer. What was more difficult, the physical challenges or the mental challenges of kind of overcoming both those big diagnoses and the subsequent treatments?
Some of the surgeries I've had have been quite significant surgeries where you're in a pretty bad way. There's been times where, I didn't necessarily think I'd get through the end of the week sort of bad way of, doctors are, not sure how it was going to go. So when you're in that much pain and that much discomfort, it's a lot. But I guess the interesting part of that is the mental side of that is something that I don't think spoken about enough with people navigating complex physical health challenges, and whether that be cancer, whether it be major surgeries. I always like to relate it to, when I've been in hospital. I've got a particular photo I often talk about when I do my presentations where I'm hooked up to everything under the sun, pain medications. I've got a separate pain specialist. I'm on, tubes up your nose to keeping me alive, and nutrients, and multiple different nurses coming in, checking on me, and different surgeons, and that doctor does this. And throughout all that though, no one is essentially looking after my mental health side of things. And that's something I did learn the hard way. And I often say to people, if you haven't experienced mental illness, if you haven't experienced depression, and we probably all know someone who has, often the pain that people are experiencing when they're going through that, it is an illness. And I think people forget that, it's a mental illness. When people are experiencing that illness and they're in the dark depths of depression and their experience of whatever that mental illness is, the pain they're experiencing can often be so painful that's often what gets people to the tipping point of crisis, is because they don't want to experience that pain anymore. They've had enough of that pain. And when you can kind of experience that, and unfortunately, I have experienced that, but I also say in a weird way, it's almost a positive in the fact that now I've experienced it, I can actually, understand a bit more. And when my, best mate took his life all those years ago in the military, or, when you hear these tragic statistics around, men especially taking their lives each and every day in Australia, 7 men on average take their lives every day in Australia. That's an awful lot of blokes every day. And you kind of try and put yourself in what they're going through, and the pain they're experiencing can be extremely painful. And having experienced just a bit of that, I can now sort of relate it to people that haven't, to say all the physical stuff and the cancer treatments and the agonizing pain and the complete open body abdominal surgeries and all this sort of stuff. Sometimes that pain I was experiencing, I don't want to be here anymore, I'm just in such a bad way, was often more painful than that obvious physical stuff. So it's a really, really good question, mate, and it's something that I'm keen to talk about in all my presentations for that reason.
There's always been a question that I've wanted to know the best answer to when it comes to when you're having a conversation with someone that is going through something, or they've been through something terrible, they've overcome it, or maybe they haven't overcome it. I've always felt a bit uneasy with the response of saying, I'm sorry to hear. I can't imagine what you're going through. How do you feel the best way is for someone to respond, to show support, if you are a person that is going through something? Is there a response? Is there a way to attack the situation that maybe makes you both feel more aligned and in unison with one another, versus kind of just othering the person in the situation?
Yeah, look, Jeremy, it's a delicate one, isn't it? And Ilan, you're probably, in the work that you do, mate, you're going to probably have these challenges yourself. I actually see what you're getting at when, often we on the other side of it, as a mate or a friend or a colleague, if you know someone's going through something or they're going through mental illness or mental health challenges, you're right. The default is to be respectful of that and to say, I'm sorry what you're going through. You're kind of just you're tiptoeing around the situation, and I think that that's understandable for majority of people. For me, to be brutally honest, I found it almost refreshing when I had and often it would be my really close mates that would often just ask the questions, sort of like, mate, shit, what does it feel like that you're going through? Or how's today been? Have you been able to bloody function much today, mate? Like, I actually have no idea what it's like. I've never experienced that. And I actually like that when they're more refreshing and honest in saying that they actually don't know what it's like. And they kind of say, like, can you educate me a bit in what it's like that you're feeling and the pain that you're going through or the difficulties that you're going through? Like, what does a normal day look like for you? And often I had those conversations with mates and now I try and do that as well. Often it's someone that you're relatively close with. It's kind of refreshing in a way that you can actually chat to them about validating what they're going through in a way, and you get a little bit deeper, and you're not there to be a psychologist or a clinician. You're there to just be honest and say, like, I actually have no idea what it's like, what you're going through with this relationship breakup, because I've never experienced it. How does it make you feel? Do you feel like a less of a man? Do you feel like you've done something wrong? Like, mate, I'm keen to find out more about how you've experienced it. If you're open to talking about it, and you could generally tell if they're not, and you might not just say that to your random colleague at work that you're not close with. So there's a time and a place and who you do it to, but I always like to call it, and it's the work I've done with Gotcha for Life, having those Gotcha for Life people that you can have those second and third and fourth follow-up conversations with, and they're the juicy conversations that I call it, that we all have it, right? When you have those mates where, an hour goes by and you go, where the fuck did that hour go? And you actually have no idea. You look at the phone and go, shit, mate, I got to run. It's fucking 8 o'clock, mate. We've just been talking shit for the last hour, because it just goes like that, right? Because you've just got this way of talking to each other and just being present with each other that the rest of the world kind of floats by. And I find they're the really juicy times that if you can then find that mate who's struggling to start opening up and asking a bit more of those deeper questions about saying, mate, can you explain it to me a bit more? I'm just interested to know what it's like. You'll find that they often would actually like that in a way to find an avenue to talk about it. So yeah, I think it's important, mate, that if you've got those mates, you've got the opportunity, you're in a situation where you actually can be honest. Don't pretend that, you've got the answers, and don't try to give them advice when you know it's bullshit yourself, or you actually have no idea and you kind of just like, the old, oh, my dad went through this and he found that work, because I found that's not useful. I've actually liked it when mates go, mate, what the fuck does it feel like when you're hooked up to all those fucking machines and you're in a shitload of pain? Like, what do you mean you have those days where you're so clouded that you literally like, can't even think of anything other than, that current situation? And, they just generally ask those questions. And I find I like talking about that. And mate, Ilan, like we're talking about, mate, in the work you do, I think that's what makes psychologists and clinicians so good at what they do. And you find one that you connect with, and often it can take 3, 4, 5 different psychologists to you find the right one, because everyone's different for you find different fits. But if you find the right one, I don't know if you lads see psychologists yourself or you have in the past, but you'll know what I mean when you've seen one that you just don't quite connect with, and then you find one that you just, boom, the hour goes like that. You've just opened up and they've just got ways to just ask those second and third questions. I guarantee the psychologist doesn't sit there and go, I'm sorry that you're going through this, Hugo, blah, blah, blah. Of course not. They're there to kind of get a bit deeper and understand why you're feeling that. So, yeah, I've found it really almost therapeutic when I have those deeper chats with mates.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that whole idea, because you're right. First of all, if you're seeking mental health support, there's no problems with shopping around and seeing which psych works for you, because everyone's got different personalities. You'd want to click with that person, wouldn't you? Especially if they're asking you the hard-hitting questions. I'm curious to know, though, what kind of fucks with me a lot is the fact that you mentioned that when you first got your diagnosis, the first one of testicular cancer, you were still in the military, you were finishing up, and you were, as you kind of have said in previous potties, you were very fit. It was like one of the what you felt was one of the healthiest periods of your life, and that would have been really entrenched in your identity of how you conceptualized yourself. But then getting that phone call and saying you've got cancer and it's it's not good. We're going to need you to do treatment. How did you cope with that identity change that came afterwards?
It was pretty challenging, I think, and one of the more challenging parts was the understanding of I actually had cancer through my body. It had spread, but I did feel the fittest and healthiest I'd felt. And I don't say that to scare people, but it was the case for me where I felt pretty normal. And outside of this little bloody lump of my testicle, I had cancer through my body. So I think that was a hard thing to navigate in the fact that it was almost like, well, hang on, like, why? What do you mean I have to have chemotherapy and all this follow-up treatment at 21 years of age when I'm passing fitness tests and going out field and being a pretty fit young bloke in the army, and that was hard to navigate. And I think the hardest part for me was probably the physical side of once I realized I was unwell. And what I mean by that was, I had the dark rings, no hair, hardly any eyebrows, face had bloody puffed out, and I looked like a different person. So you can imagine being, we're all insecure as humans. I don't care who you are, those that tell you that they aren't, well, deep down, there is some part of them that is probably going to have insecurities. And we all experience that, how you look in the mirror and, bloody how you, that's why we get haircuts, right? We do it because we want to have standards, and that's why people often work out, yes, to keep healthy, but you kind of want to look a certain way. It's how we all are. And you can imagine going through that at, say, in your early 20s, you're in the army, you're meant to be fit and healthy, and you look in the mirror and you're this different person. So as far as the identity goes, that's what I found difficult, is accepting that I was a cancer patient, that you walk down the street and people do look at you, and like that was a big thing to navigate because you're going through an age where we are insecure, especially young men. You're going out to parties, and I remember chucking blazers on and going to 21st and pretending that no, I'm fine, and doing what I'm doing now and cracking these jokes. But to be honest, that was a bit of a defense mechanism I had to kind of put on that front and put on that mask. And as I often talk about over the years, that eventually it kind of piled up and it became harder to deal with, and it kind of came crashing down in a way that I'm completely opposite with now. I'm all about opening up and talking about what you're experiencing, but back then I didn't do that. So that was tough, mate. The identity part of being a different person to who I was.
What exactly was that crash? If you don't mind going into it, I think it would just be so vital for blokes and young girls and people to just hear in general. What was that crash, and did it come from not opening up, or did it come from perceptions maybe from other people? What was it, and how did you build the resilience to get over it?
Yeah, look, I think we've all heard that expression, right? The weight on your shoulders. I think, yeah, that's the similar logic, right? Like over the years, I got very good at being I felt that I had to be. Initially, it started out as it came easier to me to be positive because I'm naturally a pretty positive guy. But then when I realized that, hang on, I'm kind of out of my depth here. Like I'm struggling a bit. Hang on, this has come too far. It's kind of like, I don't know, if you started out diving and you're kind of off the 3 meter boards and you kind of then go to the 10 meters and the higher you start to go, hang on, no, I need a bit of help here. I don't know what I'm doing. I kind of started to experiencing that, but that's when I put up that front and almost, faked my way through it, in the fact that I wasn't honest in how I was feeling. When people would ask me, even the closest people in my life, whether it be my parents, my partner or whatever, how you go? Everything all good today? Yeah, no, I'm fine. And yeah, no, I'm good. I'll get through this. And everyone would always say, geez, Hugo, mate, you're so bloody, I don't know how you do it. You are just so positive. The more I heard that, the more I felt I had to be that person. So you can imagine you've now created this person. I created this person, right? That everyone looked at me as being that super positive person, that you're so inspirational. Keep going, mate. So I came such a long way that I felt like I was too deep. There's no going back from it. So over the years, I literally just kept having to be that person. And what I didn't realize, it's important to, yes, it's great to have those traits and be that person, but it's also important to put your hand up and say, actually, you know what? I'm going to take off this armor. I'm actually really struggling. Today is not a good day. I need some help. I can't do this by myself. Amber, mum, dad, whoever, can you help me get through this? And that's something that I wish I knew what I knew now, and the advice to people listening is that, you don't have to be that super positive, inspiring dude all the time that, you can tackle life's challenges. It is completely okay to put your hand out, ask for help, and someone to actually go, you know what, I'm going to help you get through this. Let's get through this together. I'll walk you through it. It just might make it that little bit easier. And what I realized is once I started doing that and just chipping away at it and experiencing that, you realize that, oh, that actually does make it feel easier. You know, you can help me get through this. It does make me feel a little bit more comfortable in what I'm going through. So the more then you experience that side of it, it's like the flip of what I was talking about. You then want to do more of that until you become so open and honest and vulnerable that you want to do it in all aspects of your life, that you always want to be vulnerable and open and share what you're going through, and opening up and expressing your emotions, which a lot of blokes don't do. I kind of experienced it the hard way.
Mate, how, like, because you became a dad recently as well, or not recently, but sometime early last year, if that's correct. How
Yeah,
has that
yep.
changed your perspective on everything?
Look, I love it. I honestly do. I probably underestimated how much fatherhood would change my life for the absolute better. And I think the main reason being you have someone else in your life that is vastly more important than you. It's the pinnacle of, everything you do in life is for them. That it just changes the way you think, the way you do things, whether it be that, supporting your family, being a good dad, wanting him to grow up in a world that you want him to grow up with, wanting to have the values that you want to instill in him. And you just have this greater responsibility in life. And it's an amazing feeling to realize that you're no longer that center of gravity, the most important person. You've now got this other thing, this human that you're in charge of creating that life for them. And to me, it's amazing feeling. And the best part is that when I'm going through these health challenges, and unfortunately I still am going through a fair bit, and I have those nights where I'm up during the night and I'm in pain and I'm a bit over it, and I still have those days where I just get fucking angry and I go, I'm bloody over this, Amber. I want to fucking book in for this surgery. I've had enough. And I'm not always bloody joking around and happy all the time. And they're the times where Teddy will bloody have a toy that he's found and hold it out for me to give me his toy, and I go, oh, thanks, mate. Thanks for your little toy. And then you kind of realize that it just shifted you in that millisecond, being a 1-year-old, by pulling his hand out with a little toy. That's his way of just saying, Dad, can you look at my new little toy I just found? And how much that just in that moment changes your mood. It changes, what your important part of that mindset you're in is now him. And it's just, it's crazy to think that how a 1-year-old can have that power on you is pretty special. So that's what I love. That he helps me so much, and he's only one, which is a pretty cool thing.
That's awesome, mate. And I think it just speaks volumes as to how amazing and important and imperative it is to have people around you that, will give you those strong supports that you love and that can just remind you of the beauty of life. And that brings me to my next question, which is for the people that want to provide the best support for a friend, whether they're going through a health battle, whether they're going through a simple battle that might not be so grand, but it's a battle to them nevertheless. Do you feel like, as a mate, it is best to focus on not the problem all that much and just treat them as any other normal human, as any other mate in the friendship group, and maybe just pick out those important discussions for specific times? How do you reckon it's best for someone to navigate that, like from a support system as a friend? Is it just, treating them like, any other friend in the group majority of the time? Or do you rather that focus in terms of what you are experiencing?
No, it's a good point. And firstly, it's important to acknowledge exactly what you just said. Whatever someone's version of what they're going through, that may be significant to them, and what may be trivial to someone else, it's certainly not trivial to them. And one thing I've made very clear amongst my mates or people I talk to after presentation, when people say the whole, oh, what I'm going through, it's nothing compared to what you're going through. I want I'll stop you right there, mate. Well, it is. Like, clearly it is. So don't ever dismiss what you're going through. If you're feeling that certain way, you need to validate that. And I think that moves me on to the next point on sometimes as humans, we like to be validated in what we are feeling. And I think it's important that you mix it in exactly what you're talking about. In fact, this evening I had this exact chat with a mate, very close friend of mine. He's going through a bit at the moment, um, and 1 second we're like almost like dead last in the footy tipping. Like I'm just like one tip above him, and we're kind of thinking about tactics on how we can somehow like boost up a bit because we can't finish last, and like we're genuinely like contemplating this round's tipping and getting right into the important conversations on who's coming in this week. But then 5 minutes later, it's how's everything going, mate? Bloody hell, mate. He just had a third kid, for example, and it's just like, bloody hell, mate. I've got one. I do not know how you do it. Like, fuck me, mate. It's impressive in what you're going through, but and you can still be such a bloody good dad. But it must be a lot though, mate. Like, bloody hell, how do you do it? And then he goes, mate, yeah, look, it is. And before you know it, you're having quite an in-depth conversation about that problem, which is important to talk about. And then I go, mate, well, bloody hell, I take my hat off to you, mate, because I do not know how you do it. And you should be so bloody proud on you're such an amazing dad to your kids, first and foremost, regardless of what happens next, mate. And then you're having those really beautiful chats. And then, on the way home when had Teddy struck to me, and then we'll start talking and I go, bloody hell, do you think the Crows are going to win on bloody against bloody GWS on the weekend? And you start flipping that chat again. And I think they're the beautiful chats where they're not forced. You don't have to think about them. And I think if we all have those special friends in our lives, and he is one of those people, you don't have to force those conversations. They can come out, when they come out. It's just part of in the midst of other chats or whatever. That's when you can find that people open up more too. They feel like the armor's off and they can be a bit more open, honest, and vulnerable rather than kind of almost forcing the chat. And you can feel their arms across and they're just a bit uncomfortable. It's good to have the banter, those sort of chats as well. But amongst that, there are ways to say, mate, so come on, tell me, anything changed on that front, mate? Like, come on, let's talk about it. And that's when I find it's the best way to do it. So if you're listening to this and, you're either going through something or you've got a good mate that is going through something, approach it that way, have those chats about what makes you best mates, but then just have the next chat of just being, validating what they're going through. Like, I don't know how the hell you're actually going through that, mate, but bloody good on you. Like, look at you. You're still bloody here. You're still functioning. You're still a bloody good mate to me, and then call them a bloody pisshead or, cracking a joke or whatever, because that's important too, I remember there were times in hospital that I was just talking about my bald head, chemo, hating the way I looked, and often it was the mates that would come in that would be like, at least you don't have to worry about your hairs in the morning, or comments like that, which some people might say is, dark, crude-ish humour, but I actually appreciated that, and those mates knew that, so I liked the way that they could still banter me and not kind of just treat me as this, like, you all okay, mate? Like, oh, anything I can do? It's like, I'm still a mate that likes a banter and likes a joke too. So those who are going through challenging times, still treat them as your good mates, still banter, still talk about the footy, still grab that beer with him on the weekend, but you'll know when the timing's right to then just ask and validate what they're going through and ask the second and third questions. That's how I've found the best way to do it.
We love that, Hugo. We're going to have to get you on another time because Zoom has decided to shaft us with their bloody time limits. Where are the best place that people can find you, number one? Number two, what do you have planned for the next coming months?
Should do like one of those quiz shows where you get like a fast 60 seconds, just spit out like the questions that we haven't even gone through. But look, to be honest with you, I'm more than happy. I think I said offline, lad, that I'll be in Melbourne coming up, so maybe we can do a part two in person. And if anything, I said it's great to meet you guys virtually. And exactly what I was talking about with that conversation with a mate. When you meet someone for the first time, straight away after that first meeting and conversation, you already feel more open and you're chatting more. And I bet you guys experienced that with your podcast guests, where you've probably just finished it. You've had this guest on, you're like, fuck, I was just getting good. I was just starting to open up. I've got these questions I want to ask him. So maybe we've just unlocked this whole new concept of podcasting. It's going to be bloody
I think
massive.
you have.
But anyway, but sorry, to answer your question, mate. Look, I'm a pretty open dude. If people find me, on Instagram or on any social media means, LinkedIn or whatever. LinkedIn's very, very. I don't know if you got LinkedIn listeners, but you might. I'm pretty open. Reach out, say g'day. Any questions that you might have. Otherwise, my charity website, 25 Stay Alive, is a good place to find out the work I do. And if you're listening and you've got a footy club or a community where I can come out and do my workshops, I'd love to do that too.
We love that, mate. Thank you so much for coming on today. Zoom's probably going to kick us off. So on that note, guys, we hope you guys enjoyed the episode and have a lovely rest of your week.
Thanks, guys. We'll chat soon and look forward to seeing you in Melbourne.